Hi, today we're going to talk about planktonic algae. How's that? This is Michael Shevack. Welcome to Godsearch. Why are we here? I mean, really, there are so many better things to do in the course of a day. Well, we're here because I think it's worthwhile. You see, these days, there's a lot of stuff happening. I'm not just talking about all the offenses in the news, but underneath that is the largest revolution in human beings that has ever taken place on the scale. It is an opening of consciousness and an awareness of the intimacy and the intricacy of something very different, something which stands apart from the mere commonplace. It's something that is actually teachable and can be experienced. It is the experience that here on Godsearch we call God, the experience called God. It's an experience, like the word God, which is good, of greater unity, of greater truth, and greater alignment between your own actions and how the world operates. The God experience is to learn how life works for good, how life works for to create good. And that's what we're here to always discuss in different ways. We'll touch on different subject matters such as religion and science and all sorts of things that are important for unifying our way of thinking. Because the more we think in unified terms, the more we act in unified terms. And the more we do that, it is a common experience among people who search for God all the time that the more we do that, the more we actually experience that good. So today, as I've hinted, it wasn't a hint, it was pretty egregiously stated. I want to talk about planktonic algae. That's a very interesting thing. No, no. Planktonic algae is a doorway to understanding what's going on and why it's not working in the world. While why history is so incredibly burdened and all of the machinations of nations are still failing to fulfill the great prophetic expectations that there will not be any war. They will not even teach war. It's not going to be teachable. It's not going to be needed. It's not going to be perpetuated. You know, planktonic algae is a very interesting thing. Now, I don't know how many of you have gone to England, all right, but they have this very interesting thing called the White Cliffs of Dover. They're White Cliffs of Dover, and if you look at them, that's what they are. They're white cliffs, and they happen to be in Dover. Now, no one got in there with a can of Benjamin Williams and turned them white. They didn't do that. What it is that there were levels of planktonic algae that shed its little it's kind of little calcium exoskeleton to it. And it over time, it just built up and built up and built up from these little bodies of planktonic algae until you got this enormous mountain. Now, why is that interesting? Okay, it's really cool. But it's interesting because the White Cliffs of Dover posed a tremendous and formidable obstacle to invasion in England. England already is an island. And then the White Cliffs of Dover created this incredible barrier that was formed of, little bodies of algae. Now think about it. That little algae was responsible for safeguarding an island that whose people and culture, when you look around the world, you can see it. The British culture became the standard basically for the quality of life for all of us. It was a tremendous colonial nation. It seeded its culture through let's be frank, its imperialism and its desire to create an empire, which is what the imperialism means, all around the world. And it seeded their culture as a great, powerful, universal culture. It still is, and had a great effect, although oftentimes doing it in ways that are highly questionable. Nonetheless, it did spread the culture and it did unify the world such that if you go to Asia, you'll see the effect of that culture. And you'll see it in British form, and you'll see an American form, which to a great extent emulates the British form. It's just a little bit more fun, I think. But the important thing is that this planktonic algae actually was part of why Britain became so secure and so safe and so powerful on its island in order to be this incredible, gigantic imperialist force that transformed and unified the world, so much so that, as you probably know, English has become the universal language. It's a very strange language, English. It's a great functional hodgepodge. You can just add anything into it and it kind of adapts. It's not like the German, which is very related with das and and der, and they just have so many complications, and the verbs go at the end instead of in the middle. English is really pared down. It's a very stripped down German, and it's very, very plastic. So it's become a universal language everywhere you go because of Britain's culture and of course America as its child afterwards. Now, planktonic algae. The important thing is notice that history, which is this incredible, as we discussed, process and vision by which all nations and all people become unified in a singular vision and understanding of goodness, commonly called God. This is the prophetic biblical view, originated by the Hebrews. And this process of history is affected by this tiny little algae. If the algae wasn't there, it wouldn't have taken place in the same way. Now, why is this important? Because there is a mythology out there which is extremely dangerous. I wouldn't even call it a mythology, that's dignifying it. It's a falsity. It's a falsity. The falsity is that human beings do their little thing. They build their civilization, and they build their buildings and their civilization, and they create their weaponry, and it's a war of thought, exclusively a war of thought that doesn't touch on the earth, and it doesn't touch on all life on the planet, and that history is somehow separated from nature. Separate. It just goes on in our mind, and it doesn't have anything to do with the planet. The planet has nothing to do with history, but yet these little algae that are there, tiny, microscopic, were in fact fully involved and made it possible for the earth to actually be there and participate and support in the British expansion. This is just one example. These examples exist all the time, all the time. I mean, the sacred boundaries around any nation that properly evolves in a spiritual context with nature also receives a certain measure of buffering and safeguarding from natural boundaries that develop out of the consciousness of the people. Footnote, Israel, Palestine, and all sorts of complex things there. Now, we're not talking about history apart from the earth. No, we're not talking about history that is in a state of, shall we say, original sin, which we discussed way back in Godsearch. We're not talking about that we are lost in our own minds and disconnected from the earth. And there is history as opposed to religion because the academics created a theology which distinguished radically the moral or the human view from the earthly natural view. The earth, as we call it, the earth, it's pretty much of a construct. In what way can you really separate the earth from human beings? And you certainly can't do it if consciousness is higher than the material and it can act upon it, okay? Or even if there is a so-called creator God, I don't know, it's a good theory, that created the material. It's very ridiculous to say that the material is completely apart from the creative or spiritual consciousness, such that there are some people, I believe recently it was Roger Penrose who had postulated the idea that the matter is actually living and that there's a consciousness in it, right? I think that's a very, very nice theory and worth exploring. But the idea that history is disconnected from nature is a theological problem. And take a look at planktonic algae in the White Cliffs of Dover, and you see that although it appears that human beings are separate from nature, we are not. As if it appears that nature is somewhat separated from us, such that we would call ourselves made in the image of God, and a God which is completely separated, absolutely 100%, with no linkage whatsoever to human life. Well, I think it's a little bit of an overstatement. A little bit of an overstatement. You see, these days, we still have the habit of thinking that what we do as a nation and what we do between nations and what our political philosophies are all about us and our particular view of ourselves and our particular view of our people and the particular view of our people in relationship to other people, which creates all sorts of stuff that we call politics. And we miss something which a little tiny piece of white algae can instruct us on if we open our eyes, which is there is not such a thing as history as an idea or a movement of unification and of a process by which justice and wholeness will be conferred to the earth. It's not just history. It's what I would have to call biohistory. The fate of the British Empire was linked to the fate of planktonic algae. Planktonic algae was there supporting the British Empire in the same way that every day you go outside, you might step on this little creature called an ant that aerates the soil, and without whom you would have trouble finding food to eat. I mean, you'd have to forage a little bit. You'd find it eventually because there are other creatures besides ants that do it. But you would have a little bit of difficulty. The notion that history is apart from nature is a theological, I believe, my opinion. I could be wrong. Let me hear from you. Go to yourgodsearch.com and, pen me a note. Let's have a discussion on this. I believe that notion that human history is completely 100% separate from nature is a theological overstatement, and I'm being kind. Some people would call it bull worship, like like Elijah, sacrificing his bulls with Jezebel's priests, and he tortures the bull, and the fire comes down from heaven to prove who is the real God rather than who really worships bull. I think the notion of history has to include biology, and the notion of history has to include genetics. And the notion of history, once you include genetics, becomes less abstract and more solid. Now here, I'm not Christian, but I've studied it a lot. Here, one has to make a distinction between the Catholic Eucharist and the a Protestant Eucharist. There are many different kinds of Protestant Eucharists, and if I am offending anyone for commenting about their faith because I don't follow it, and if I'm making a mistake, please go to yourgodsearch.com, slap me around, tell me what I did wrong, and teach me so I can grow. But when in the Catholic Eucharist you have Christ dying, resurrecting, meaning he's surpassing the boundary between life and death. And then you have the materiality of the man merging with the substance of quote unquote God. It's a very tricky thing. And you set it out there in faith to spread the intrinsic deep meaning. Well, the initial phases of it it's taken in as a tremendous faith idea, and it rolls out and rolls out in history, creating Western history, and from my perspective culminates in the Hiroshima on one side, where the mind has become ascendant over matter from the word mother, meaning we gained that degree of power over the material. This is all implicit in the Eucharist and in the Nicene Creed. And at the exact same time, you have the torching of a lot of different peoples, but especially the people of the covenant of the flesh, which is how Saul of Tarsus, or Paul the Evangel, framed Jews as being bodily or more material as opposed to a more spiritual faith. The net is in the Catholic Eucharist. It begins with an abstraction that gets out there because it is a Greco-Roman flavored movement. But in their formulation, it is biohistorical. It includes a deep connection between humanity and creation itself materially, and creation with all life in it, like little planktonic algae that build up the cliffs of Dover. In certain Protestant Eucharists, if you can call it a Eucharist, it's communion with the bread and the wine. It's a memorial, and the memorial does not see the host as being actually flesh and blood. I'm not saying it's not wrong. I'm not saying it's not right. There's plenty of things here to discuss that's way beyond this. But I'm saying it's missing a fleshly bodily component to the universal impulse behind this formulation of Western civilization. So you get human society and human nation states disjunct from nature. And that caused great difficulties, as we all know, to many, many women out there and many, many people who are caring about the fact that all life, including the planet, has been somewhat handicapped by human invention and human societies and human science, and also leading to certain ecological problems, which we are pretty familiar with, though one person did write in to Godsearch and complained that global warming was a bit of a hoax, and he was really fascinating. He had some very interesting stuff. I'd love to have him on Godsearch. I'm talking to him because he's quite an interesting fellow. But the important thing here is that the tendency within the dominant culture, which is Western culture, set in motion a version of Western civilization where the nature of the philosophy disjuncted history from the earth. It set in motion a great material wave of human invention. It was very powerful. It allowed us to feed enormous people, far more than could have been predicted that we reproduced. It had value. Everything that exists has value in some form or another, or it wouldn't. But planktonic algae, these little algae are going, hey, remember me? They are kind of indicators that went awry, that we don't need a separate movement called ecology as apart from civilization, that's a falsity. And we don't need civilization to bury itself into the earthly natural and forget the extraordinary advance of the human natural with a mind that can be ascendant to lower levels of material self-expression and shape it according to an ego which is extremely individualized, very individualized ego. I mean, everything about human beings is amazingly individualistic. I mean, even the numbers of muscles in our face is more than any other creature that has. I mean, we are the only near perpendicular creature. Near perpendicular, I mean, a philosophically, metaphysical representation of a connection to heaven and earth. Now, this is really a very, very important thing because we cannot view anymore history as separate from biology and biology separate from history. And here, being from a Hebrew, which originates history as coming from a man and a woman and their children, as well as that man and other women and their children. There were different lineages of history, and other people and other tribes which come to know the unity and the truth and the harmonization of human action with creation that is part of covenantalization. We naturally linked the biology and the history. We didn't move as fast as the Roman Empire. We didn't just, tend to, take over and put ideas in motion and move things around with that effectively. We didn't do that. We tended not to do that. We were incredibly more tribal insofar as we were considering families, and we were considering creatures on the planet and other things that were part of our more biologically based view. But we did it in advance. So what I'm doing is I'm calling for everyone out there to kind of take a look at their belief systems. Many people have this belief in their own mind that there is this earth that just kind of sits there and it's perfect. And then all of a sudden, a human being comes on it and steps on it and messes it up. But that's not the case. That is not the case. It is not. That's where it begins to get kind of really weird when ecology-minded people start to talk. It starts to get a little strange, because there is this idealization of the earth and the perfect mother that gets messed up by the human being. And frankly, it's a disguised version of original sin, where we become disconnected from nature so we can have material self-expression. But it's a variant form of it. The fact is, what we do as people and the motion of unification on this planet that is called history is also biological. It involves breeding. It involves our very personalities. If I am getting hot-headed, I'm heated up, and my blood pressure is going up, I am warming the planet. Oh, someone out there is going, this is crazy. Yeah, no, that's not true. It is true. The fact is, the planet is inseparable from us. Life is an extension and a flowering of the life that is all around us. It becomes individual and self-aware, and what we do to ourselves personally changes our relationship to our own body, which changes our relationship to the earth. It is unavoidable. That's what happens. Now, biblically, we touched upon it in the past. That is the story of Noah in the Bible, sometimes considered a mere superstition and never happened. Well, I don't particularly believe it happened all over the earth. And I think any human being would not be capable of gathering every single creature on the planet 2 by 2. I think the ark would have been a little bit too big to do in the lifetime. Okay, granted, he had a supernatural God, so that's possible. But I don't buy that, because my particular view is a little bit more, reasonable. Okay, but I'm not denying whether you believe in the reasonable or whether you believe in the actual biblical facticity. They both teach the same thing, that there is an intricate relationship between human beings and the earth. The politics, for instance, these days, which is overheating, is hardly ecologically sound. The anxiety and the nervousness and the worry of people is hardly ecologically sound. And the wars that we are pushing and the agendas we are pushing, which is causing tremendous pain and suffering, bodily destruction, hurt to whole groups of people, and emotionally devastating to people who are sitting on their sofa listening to news reports. It's really bad for the creation of which we are a part here on planet Earth. And I have to tell you, this is just one planet. As Steven Spielberg's movie is going to be coming out, we're going to have to slowly face the fact that we may not be alone. We may not be alone. And there may be a community out there that we have to get to know, many of whom may already know some of these basic principles, that we are deeply connected to the material of the earth, although we can shape it and do wondrously technological things. We don't do it in a vacuum. The vacuum actually is percolating with energy and includes us. Planktonic algae is just one of those marvelous things that teaches us that the course of human history and the course and destiny of a nation to envelop the entire world in a universal language and a universal standard of living, and the marvelous things that the British Empire gave the world, is part and of the fabric of all existence. It's not an arbitrariness of power. It's not that Britain became powerful merely because it had such and such armors and that kind of stuff. There is something deeper that embraced and supported its power. This is a doorway. This is a doorway to a deeper discussion of the relationship of politics to spirituality, and the relationship of spirituality to government, and how to direct the unity of all of the nations and all the people, so that we do not continue to make ourselves nervous, create high blood pressure, overweight problems, and mess up the health and well-being of ourselves personally and the larger community we share, which includes, as the planktonic algae make very clear, it includes the entire planet and the destiny of all people on it. It's this kind of a singular message that came to me, that I really wanted to talk about planktonic algae because of that challenge that I recently received about the hoax of global warming, and excellent points were made on that. And I'm hoping to get the gentleman on Godsearch. But in the meantime, just think about that. Think about that little planktonic algae, because you may find that that little one-celled creature really opens the door. I think it's one-celled, maybe more. just opens the door to putting the pieces back together to human life. If I sit here with my computer, it is all of the planet coming through me as itself, creating. And as I do that, I am changing everything around me, and everything around me is changing through me to do it. Go wrap your head around that. Okay. Anyway, this is Michael Shevack. Thank you so much for coming and being here on Godsearch every Wednesday about 5:45 in the morning. That's Eastern daytime. So, hey, uncover God, discover God. And if you've gotten lost because of very strange theology that splits the world into pieces, and then you can't find the pieces in order to put them back together, recover God. It's an experience of unity, of truth, and of, effectiveness, where your actions merge with the material actions of the world, and you get a sense of good. Hey, thanks for being here. See you next week. God bless. Bye-bye.